The clock in St. Benedict's Academy corridor struck 3, each hollow chime reverberating through the empty hallway like a drum calling soldiers to battle. Thomas Webb flinched at the sound, knowing what awaited him outside. He tucked his worn leather journal deeper into his backpack, fingers lingering over the small silver cross embossed on its cover. A 16th birthday gift from his father he'd never properly appreciated. The scent of rain-soaked earth wafted through the open windows, promising an afternoon storm that matched his turbulent thoughts. "Looking for somewhere to hide, Webb?" Alexander Kingston's voice cut through the corridor's silence, his uniform impeccably pressed, tie perfectly knotted, a stark contrast to Thomas's rumpled blazer and loose collar. Behind Alexander stood his usual entourage, Ethan, Marcus, and Dominic, all sons of the town's elite. Their matching smirks confirmed Thomas's fears. Today's humiliation would be a public spectacle. "Just heading home, Alex." Thomas attempted to keep his voice steady, eyes fixed on the worn leather of his shoes rather than meeting his tormentor's gaze. The first loose thread of his composure began to unravel. "Funny thing about that," Alexander's voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced consequences. "I heard your father's back in town. The famous disappearing man returns. Tell me, does he even recognize you anymore?" The words sliced deeper than any physical blow could have. Thomas's jaw tightened, his right hand instinctively forming a fist before he slowly, deliberately uncurled his fingers. The choice, instant and barely noticeable to others, revealed the spiritual war within him. 3 years of his father's absence, 3 years of unanswered questions, and yet something held him back from the violence that surged through his veins. "My father's business isn't yours," Thomas replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The corridor suddenly felt narrower, the ornate wooden crosses adorning the academy's walls, watching him like silent judges. One in particular caught his eye, carved from olive wood, brought back from Jerusalem by the school's founder. Unlike the others, this cross had a crack running through its center, imperfect yet somehow more authentic for its damage. Alexander's laugh echoed against the lockers. "Your father's business became everyone's business when he abandoned his family and this town. Guess running away runs in the family, doesn't it?" He stepped closer, his expensive cologne mingling with the petrichor scent from outside. "Your father was a coward, and now we see where you get it from. Deal." The older student's fist connected with Thomas's shoulder, knocking him against the lockers with a metallic clang. Thomas could have blocked it. 3 years of martial arts lessons before his father left had taught him how, but something deeper than fear kept his arms at his sides. The journal slipped from his backpack, falling open to reveal pages of handwritten notes and a small photograph tucked inside. Marcus snatched it before Thomas could react. "What's this?" "Dear Diary, today I cried because Daddy doesn't love me." His mocking tone drew laughter from the others. "Give it back." Thomas's voice found new strength, surprising even himself. "That's private. Private like your father's reasons for abandoning you." Alexander's words dripped with venom as he took the journal from Marcus. His eyes narrowed on the photograph. Thomas standing beside a tall man in military dress uniform, both smiling at the camera. "Is this him, the great invisible father?" "Doesn't look like much to me." Thomas lunged forward, but Ethan and Dominic caught his arms. The rain began outside, fat droplets hitting the windows with increasing intensity, the smell of wet earth growing stronger, filling his nostrils with memories of fishing trips and camping expeditions from what felt like another lifetime. Alexander held the photograph just out of reach. What would Daddy say if he could see his son now, too scared to even throw a punch? His hand closed around the photograph, crumpling it slightly. "Maybe I should find him and ask myself. I hear he's staying at the Westridge Hotel." The mention of his father's location, information Thomas himself didn't possess, sent a jolt through him. The struggle intensified, but Ethan and Dominic's grip remained firm. With calm deliberation, Alexander pushed his knuckles against Thomas's cheek. Not quite a punch, but a prolonged pressure that forced Thomas's head sideways. The ornate clock down the hall ticked loudly, marking each second of his humiliation. "Nothing to say, Webb. No defense of your father's honor." Alexander's voice dropped lower. "Maybe he left because he saw what a disappointment you are." The words hung in the air like the suspended moment before glass shatters. Thomas felt something break inside him, not his resolve against violence, but the dam holding back 3 years of grief. A single tear tracked down his cheek, and Alexander's face lit with triumph. And now he cries. Pathetic. Alexander released him with a shove, tossing the journal to the floor, where it landed with a soft thud. "Let's go. Even tormenting Webb gets boring eventually." The group departed, their laughter echoing down the corridor long after they'd disappeared from sight. Thomas remained motionless against the lockers, the rain's intensity matching the storm inside him. He slowly retrieved his journal, smoothing the crumpled photograph with trembling fingers. His father's eyes stared back at him, kind, yet somehow distant, as if already planning his departure, even as the picture was taken. Thunder rumbled outside, as Thomas finally moved toward the exit, the cracked cross on the wall catching his attention once more. Something about its broken state resonated with him now, damaged yet still standing. He paused beneath it, the rain-soaked earth smell growing stronger as he approached the doors leading outside. The decision came without conscious thought. Instead of heading home to an empty house, he turned toward the town center and the Westridge Hotel. The storm had fully broken by the time Thomas reached the hotel, his uniform soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead. The lobby's warm lighting and polished marble floors made him acutely aware of the puddle forming around his feet. At the reception desk, a woman with pearl earrings and a name tag reading Margaret raised an eyebrow at his bedraggled appearance. "I'm looking for James Webb," Thomas said, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. "I was told he's staying here." Margaret's expression softened. "Room 307, dear. Shall I call up first?" "No," Thomas replied quickly. "Thank you, but no. I'd like to surprise him." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor stretched into eternity, the brass hands of his wristwatch marking time with excruciating slowness. The watch had been his father's, left behind on the bathroom counter 3 years ago, along with his wedding ring and a note too brief to explain anything. Thomas had worn it every day since, though it had always been too large for his wrist. Room 307 loomed before him, the gold numerals gleaming under hallway lights. Thomas raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What would he say? What could possibly bridge the chasm of 3 years' absence? The scent of rain-soaked earth clung to his clothes, a reminder of his vulnerability. His knuckles hovered inches from the door when it suddenly opened. James Webb stood framed in the doorway, older than in Thomas's memories, his once dark hair now streaked with grey, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wore a simple button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. Recognition, followed by shock, transformed his features. "Thomas?" The single word contained volumes, surprise, guilt, something like hope. "Alexander Kingston says you're a coward." The accusation tumbled from Thomas's lips before he could stop it, his voice breaking on the last word. "He said running away runs in our family." His father stepped back as if physically struck, creating space for Thomas to enter the room. Inside, the hotel's luxury contrasted sharply with the Spartan arrangement of his father's belongings. A single suitcase lay open on the bed, clothes folded with military precision. On the desk sat a worn Bible, and beside it the twin to Thomas's journal. Same leather binding, same silver cross embossed on the cover. "He's not entirely wrong," James said finally, closing the door. "I did run away, not from duty, never from duty, but perhaps from the pain of what I had to do." Which was what, exactly? Thomas remained standing, water dripping from his uniform onto the plush carpet. "What duty requires abandoning your family for 3 years without explanation?" James gestured toward the room's single armchair. "Please sit. You're soaked through." When Thomas didn't move, he sighed. I owe you an explanation. I've owed you one for 3 years. Then start explaining. Thomas's voice hardened, surprising himself with its edge. His father moved to the desk, picking up the Bible and journal with reverence. I never left the military, Thomas. Not really. After my official discharge, I was recruited for specialized work. Operations that required complete secrecy, complete disconnection from personal ties. You couldn't even call, right? The questions burst forth, each carrying the weight of 1,000 lonely nights. The work I did, made any contact dangerous. For you and your mother most of all. James's voice remained level, but his knuckles whitened around the Bible he held. I made enemies, Thomas. Powerful ones. My presence in your life would have painted targets on your backs. So you painted invisible ones instead, Thomas replied bitterly. Do you know what it's like to be the son who was abandoned? To have no answer when people ask where your father went? The clock on the nightstand ticked loudly in the silence that followed, its rhythm mimicking the one at school. Outside, rain continued to pour, drumming against the window in a chaotic percussion. I know about the bullying, James said finally. Your mother told me when I called her last week. Thomas stiffened. You called Mom? To tell her I was coming home for good. My contract is fulfilled. The danger has passed. James set the Bible down, approaching Thomas with cautious steps. She told me about Alexander Kingston and his friends, about how you never fight back. Is that why you're here? To teach me how to throw a punch? Bitterness edged Thomas's words. No. James stopped, respecting the invisible barrier between them. I'm here to tell you how proud I am that you don't. The statement hung in the air, unexpected and disarming. Thomas blinked, certain he had misheard. Proud? They humiliate me daily. Today, they... He stopped, the memory too fresh. Used me as ammunition, James finished softly. I know. And still, you chose restraint. Do you know why I gave you that journal before I left? Thomas shook his head, suddenly aware of the soaked item in his backpack. James retrieved his own journal from the desk, opening it to reveal pages filled with neat handwriting. Every day we were apart, I wrote to you. Things I wished I could say. Lessons I hope to teach you someday. He extended the journal. This belongs to you now. Thomas hesitated before taking it, the leather warm from his father's hands. The gesture, so simple yet profound, caused a hairline crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. I don't understand why you're proud of me for being weak. Not weak, Thomas. Strong in the hardest way possible. James's voice took on a new intensity. Any man can strike back when struck. It takes exceptional strength to absorb a blow and choose a different path. The rain outside began to ease, its rhythm softening. Thomas sat heavily in the armchair, his father's journal in his lap. Alexander will never stop. None of them will. They see restraint as weakness. Then they understand nothing about true strength, James replied, kneeling before the chair to meet Thomas at eye level. Do you know what I did in the military after my official service ended? Thomas shook his head. I negotiated peace in conflict zones where diplomats feared to tread. Not with weapons, but with words. With understanding and, when necessary, with forgiveness that seemed impossible. James's eyes held a shadow of the horrors he'd witnessed. I learned that the men quickest to violence are often the most afraid. Alexander Kingston bullies you because he fears what he doesn't understand, your quiet strength. The concept seemed impossible, yet something in his father's words resonated with a truth Thomas had sensed, but never articulated. He opened the journal, finding the first entry dated the very day his father had left. The scent of rain-soaked earth seemed to rise from the pages, as if his father had carried the same memories through the years. I have something to show you, James said, rising to retrieve his suitcase. From a hidden compartment, he withdrew a simple wooden cross on a leather cord, similar to the cracked one at school, though smaller and intact. This was given to me by a man who had every reason to hate me. His village had been destroyed in crossfire, his family displaced. When I came to negotiate peace, he recognized my uniform as that of the enemy. Thomas took the cross, feeling the smooth wood between his fingers. He invited me into what remained of his home and offered me the only drink he had, water in a cracked cup. When I asked why he would show kindness to someone he should hate, he gave me this cross and said, "Because hate has never built anything worth keeping." The words settled over Thomas like a mantle. He thought of Alexander's face, contorted with mockery, of the satisfaction in his eyes when Thomas showed pain. "So I just keep taking it? Keep letting them hurt me?" "No," James replied firmly. "Tomorrow, I'll accompany you to speak with your headmaster. Alexander's behavior crosses lines that should never be tolerated, but addressing it through proper channels doesn't mean meeting cruelty with cruelty. And if that doesn't work," Thomas challenged, "then we face it together, as we should have been doing these past 3 years. James hesitated, then placed his hand over Thomas's. "I can't undo my absence, son, but I can be present for every day forward if you'll let me." The simple promise, spoken without flourish, struck Thomas with unexpected force. The clock ticked steadily, marking the first moments of a possible reconciliation. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving behind only the lingering scent of wet earth and new possibility. They mocked the young man for not fighting back. The words Alexander had thrown at him seemed different now, illuminated by his father's unexpected perspective. Thomas clutched the wooden cross, feeling its edges press into his palm. "I need time," he said finally. 3 years is a lot to process in one afternoon." James nodded, the acceptance in his eyes offering what Thomas needed most, space to find his own path forward. "I have a reservation at Donnelly's for dinner. Your mother mentioned it was still your favorite. Would you join me? We could start small, just a meal between 2 people getting reacquainted." The invitation hung in the air, simple yet monumental. Thomas thought of the empty house awaiting him, of the journal filled with 3 years of his father's thoughts, of the cracked cross at school that remained whole despite its damage. "I'd like that," he said softly, surprising himself with the truth of it. They walked to the restaurant in companionable silence, the street still wet from the recent downpour. The familiar sign of Donnelly's glowed warm against the darkening sky, promising comfort and normalcy when nothing felt normal anymore. As they approached the entrance, a group of students from St. Benedict's emerged. Alexander among them, his laughter cutting short when he spotted Thomas. Alexander's eyes widened as they registered James Webb's imposing presence beside Thomas. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite fear, but the uncertainty that comes when a comfortable narrative is suddenly challenged. "Evening, Thomas," Alexander managed, his usual bravado notably diminished. "Alexander." Thomas nodded, feeling strangely calm in the eye of a storm that had suddenly lost its power. "This is my father, James Webb." James extended his hand, his posture relaxed yet commanding respect. "Mr. Kingston, I understand you know my son from school." Alexander hesitated before shaking the offered hand, his own seeming smaller within James's firm grip. "Yes, sir. We have several classes together." "Good. Then I expect you'll be seeing more of each other, and of me, as I'll be quite involved with Thomas's education going forward." James's smile remained pleasant, but his eyes conveyed something that made Alexander step back slightly. "I look forward to attending the school functions I've missed. Perhaps we'll have a chance for a more in-depth conversation then." The implication hung in the air, clear without being explicitly threatening. Alexander mumbled something about being late and hurried past, his friends following with confused glances over their shoulders. "You didn't threaten him," Thomas observed as they entered the restaurant, the familiar scent of garlic and tomato sauce replacing the rain-soaked earth smell that had followed him all day. "I didn't need to," James replied, accepting menus from the hostess. "People like Alexander respond to perceived power. Right now, he's reassessing where you stand." "Because of who my father is," Thomas said, the title still feeling foreign on his tongue after so long. No, James corrected gently, because you stood your ground without lowering yourself to his tactics. That kind of integrity is rare, Thomas. It commands respect, even from those who don't understand it. The restaurant's antique clock chimed 7, its tone warmer than the school's hollow chimes. Thomas opened his menu, though he already knew what he would order, the same spaghetti bolognese he'd chosen every visit since childhood. "Why the cross?" he asked suddenly. "Why give me your journal, the same kind you kept?" James set his menu aside, giving the question his full attention. "Because some gifts are bridges, not just objects. The journals connected us even when I couldn't be present. The cross." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The cross reminds us that the greatest strength often looks like surrender to those who don't understand." They ordered, the conversation flowing more easily than Thomas had expected. His father spoke of countries Thomas had only seen in geography textbooks, of people who had lost everything yet maintained dignity that humbled him. In return, Thomas shared fragments of the life his father had missed. Piano recitals, where he'd glanced up hoping to see a familiar face. Science competitions, where he'd won honors with no one to share them. "I have something to confess," James said as their meal concluded. "I was there for your regional piano competition last year." Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. "What?" "In the back. Baseball cap pulled low. I couldn't risk being recognized, but I couldn't bear missing it either. Your Chopin etude was flawless." James's eyes held a sheen of moisture. "I've been walking a tightrope, Thomas, staying away to keep you safe, coming close enough to catch glimpses of your life when I could manage it without being seen." The revelation rendered Thomas speechless. He had felt so utterly alone, yet his father had been orbiting his life like a distant planet, present but beyond reach. The thought was simultaneously comforting and painful. "Did Mom know about any of it?" James shook his head. "Not until last week. I couldn't risk it, even with her. The work I was doing," he sighed. "Let's just say there are people who would use any connection, any weakness, to compromise missions that saved countless lives." They mocked the young man for not fighting back. "Edith," the title that had felt like an accusation, now seemed to describe something more complex, a choice made from strength rather than weakness. Thomas fingered the wooden cross in his pocket, its smooth surface a tactile anchor. "Tomorrow at school," he began hesitantly. "Will things be different?" "That depends on you," James replied. "Alexander may back off now, or he may double down to save face. What matters is that you know the truth about yourself and about me." They paid the bill and stepped outside, the night air fresh with the aftermath of rain. The scent of rain-soaked earth had faded, replaced by the clean slate of washed pavement and renewed possibilities. The walk home stretched before them, offering time to bridge more of the 3-year gap. At the front door of their house, a place James hadn't entered since his departure, both hesitated. Light spilled from inside, silhouetting Thomas's mother through the curtains. This reunion would be more complex, laden with adult grief and reconciliation beyond Thomas's full understanding. "Whatever happens in there," Thomas said, finding words for feelings still taking shape, "I'm glad you're back." James placed a hand on his son's shoulder, not the casual gesture of their past, but a connection weighted with new understanding. "I never left completely, Thomas, and I'm not going anywhere now." They entered together, the door closing on the outside world as a new chapter began within. Thomas couldn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether Alexander would retreat or retaliate, whether his father's return would heal or further complicate the wounds of absence. But for the first time in 3 years, the clock's ticking didn't sound like a countdown to enduring another day alone. The next morning dawned clear, the storm's evidence limited to puddles reflecting a pristine sky. Thomas dressed for school with deliberate care, his tie properly knotted, blazer buttoned, armor of a different sort than he'd worn before. The wooden cross hung around his neck, hidden beneath his collar but present like a secret strength. His father waited by the door, car keys in hand. "Ready?" The drive to St. Benedict's passed in comfortable silence, the familiar route transformed by his father's presence. As they approached the ornate front gates, Thomas spotted Alexander and his friends lounging by the entrance, their postures stiffening as James's car pulled into the drop-off area. "Would you like me to walk you in?" James asked, reading the tension in Thomas's shoulders. Thomas considered the offer, tempted by the shield his father's presence would provide. The wooden cross pressed against his skin, a reminder of a different kind of strength. "No," he decided. "But thank you. I'll be here at 3 to pick you up," James promised. "And Thomas, remember who you are." The simple statement carried the weight of a benediction. Thomas nodded, gathering his backpack and stepping from the car with a straight spine and lifted chin. Alexander's eyes tracked him, calculating this new development as Thomas approached the gates alone. "Webb," Alexander called, his usual mockery tempered with caution. "Didn't expect to see you today." Why not?" Thomas stopped, maintaining a comfortable distance. The others watched with uncertain expressions, sensing a shift in the established order. Alexander glanced at the departing car, then back to Thomas. "Your father seems interesting." "He is." Thomas let the statement stand without elaboration, neither seeking Alexander's approval nor fearing his disapproval. The clock tower chimed 8:30, calling students to their first classes. "See you in English, Alex." He walked past, without waiting for a response, feeling Alexander's stare between his shoulder blades, but no longer burdened by it. Inside, he paused beneath the cracked olive wood cross, its imperfection suddenly beautiful rather than broken, a testament to endurance despite damage. The school day unfolded with a strange normalcy, classes and conversations continuing as they always had, while Thomas experienced them through a new lens. In English, Alexander chose a seat across the room rather than behind Thomas, where he usually whispered cutting remarks. At lunch, Thomas sat alone as usual, but with a peace that felt like choice rather than exclusion. When the final bell rang, Thomas gathered his things unhurriedly. Outside, true to his word, James waited by the car. Alexander and his friends emerged from the building, their attention immediately drawn to the imposing figure leaning against the vehicle. "Your dad's military, isn't he?" Alexander's question caught Thomas off guard, the first words he'd spoken directly to Thomas all day. "Yes," Thomas confirmed, watching curiosity replace the usual disdain in Alexander's expression. "My brother's considering enlisting," Alexander said, the admission surprisingly vulnerable. "Our father's against it, says it's beneath our family's station." The statement revealed more about Alexander's home life than he had likely intended. Thomas thought of his own father's words about men quickest to violence being the most afraid. "My dad might be willing to talk with him about it," he offered, surprising himself with the olive branch. "If your brother wants." Alexander's expression cycled through disbelief, suspicion, and finally a grudging appreciation. "Maybe," he said finally. "I'll ask him." It wasn't friendship, not even close, but it was a hairline crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable yesterday. Thomas nodded and continued toward his father, feeling Alexander's gaze follow him, not with the predatory focus of before, but with something new, something closer to respect. "How was it?" James asked as Thomas slid into the passenger seat. Thomas considered the question, the day's subtle shifts and realignments too numerous to catalogue fully. "Different," he said finally, "like everything looks the same, but isn't." His father nodded, as if this made perfect sense. That's often how the most important changes begin. As they pulled away from St. Benedict's, Thomas glanced back at the school's ornate facade. Alexander remained watching by the gates, his usual entourage shifting awkwardly beside him, awaiting direction from their leader, who suddenly seemed less certain of his course. They mocked the young man for not fighting back. The title resonated differently now, not as the beginning of humiliation, but as the opening of a story with an unexpected turn. Thomas touched the wooden cross beneath his shirt, feeling its contours like a promise. Until they discovered who his father was. The conclusion wasn't about intimidation or power plays, Thomas realized, but about inheritance of a different kind, the strength to stand firm without striking back, to offer water to the thirsty regardless of past grievances, to believe in reconciliation when revenge would be easier. James glanced over, reading something in his son's expression. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas smiled, the gesture more genuine than any he'd managed in 3 years, that some battles are won by not fighting them at all. His father's answering smile held pride, grief, and hope in equal measure, the complex emotional landscape they would navigate together in the days ahead. The scent of rain-soaked earth drifted through the open window, no longer a harbinger of storms, but a reminder of growth that comes after necessary cleansing. At home, Thomas's mother waited on the porch, her face a canvas of complicated emotions as she watched them approach together. The family's reunion remained fragile, 3 years of absence not erased in a single day, but the first tentative steps toward healing had begun. Thomas climbed the porch steps ahead of his father, making space for the private reunion the adults needed. Inside, he placed his father's journal on his desk beside his own, twin repositories of separate journeys now converging. The wooden cross he hung on a nail beside his window, where morning light would catch it first. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Alexander's uncertain new stance, his mother and father's delicate reconciliation, the continued integration of his father back into a life that had adapted to his absence. But for now, in this moment, Thomas felt something he'd almost forgotten. The solid ground of belonging, of being known, of standing firm in an identity stronger than circumstance. The clock on his nightstand ticked steadily, no longer counting down to endurance, but marking the rhythm of a life being reclaimed, one moment at a time.